I'd like to invite now the first panel, built-in sustainability, to come up. It'll be moderated by Tina Purdue. We'll feature some great presenters that Tina will introduce.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Tina Purdue. I'm co-chair of the Summit Planning Committee, and I have the privilege of introducing three powerhouse speakers as part of this first panel on built-in sustainability. These three experts will provide insights into how sustainable practices create new economic opportunities, build workforces, deliver on equity, and reduce environmental damage. Now, that's an ambitious set of promises, to be sure. But let me share with you a few details about each of these exciting speakers who have had extensive experience in realizing these accomplishments. Noah Chalfus is the Director of Sustainability for the Lindy Group. Now, the Lindy Group is a team of companies specializing in asphalt production, milling, paving services, concrete, and seal coating. As Lindy's Director of Sustainability, Noah is currently working to help decarbonize asphalt and concrete and develop environmental, social, and governance strategies for Lindy's family of companies. But he also has a number of other accomplishments, two of which really impressed me. He led construction of the Pittsburgh Park Conservancy's Brick Environmental Center, which was the first living building in the United States that is municipally owned, free, and open to the public. And he also helped develop Pittsburgh as a United Nations Center of Excellence in high performance buildings. So he's got a lot of others. Those are just two I picked out. Nick Messenger over here is senior research with the Ohio River Valley Institute. And this institute produces solid data-driven research and proposes policies to improve the economic performance and standards of living for the greater Ohio Valley, with a focus on shared prosperity, clean energy, and equitable democracy. As a senior researcher, Nick applies data science and economic modeling to local economic development policy, energy economics, and clean energy transition issues. He's researched and written most recently about the environmental and economic impacts of the train derailment in East Palestine and the Shell cracker plant in Beaver County. And Amelia Eggan is a senior program manager of special projects and strategy for the Pennsylvania Solar Center. The Pennsylvania Solar Center links potential solar owners with technical assistance, investors, funding opportunities, and qualified solar developers to make the process of going solar more simple and straightforward. As the senior program manager, Amelia works primarily in the GET Solar program, where she assists organizations and communities with solar feasibility analyses. She also leads the volunteer PA Solar Corps program that maps the solar potential of communities. And I'm especially proud to note that Amelia received her BA in Applied Anthropology from Indiana University. And I guess one final thing, please hold your questions until after all three of our presenters have spoken. Thank you.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. So good morning, everyone. I'll clear the air first. I did do my undergrad and my PhD work at Ohio State, so I'll hold that against me here. I'm behind enemy lines the next few weeks. But I am going to talk a little bit actually today about why maybe as we think about all of the great investments that are about to be made through federal funds, through sustainability funds here in the region, why you might actually not want to be like Ohio. So I'll get to that in a second. But you might ask, why is an economist on the sustainability panel? And one of the things that we really want to highlight in our work is when we talk about sustainability, we typically can talk about decarbonization, pollution reduction, renewable energy, energy efficiency, but there's also an economic argument and an economic element to this, right? Increased self-reliance. We heard talking about the food system being, more sustainable, more local, more resilient. Economic resiliency is a real thing, right? I spent some time down in Texas. There are a lot of folks out in West Texas who will tell you that economic resiliency from the oil booms there, very big thing, up and down. The highs are high, but the lows are low. And then shared prosperity and stronger community foundations, which are really at the core of economic development policy. And so one of the things that has happened, and the data bears this out over the last 30 or 40 years, and pretty much everywhere in the country, right? It's not a Republican or Democrat or partisan issue. This is pretty much universally true, is that we've seen economic development strategies that seem to go all in on a small number of industries, and economic development partners who make a lot of promises that often rarely pay off due to a variety of factors. When you think about making a large bet, a lot of things have to go right for that bet to hit, right? You're playing the odds when you make some sort of large investment in economic development and when you invest in a private partner. And you have to think about these things. You have to think about boom and bust cycles in energy, right? That's something that's a reality with global geopolitical conditions, global market conditions, supply and demand, right? If consumer sentiment changes around something, then a product may get phased out. If technological development happens, you may see a product that was in its heyday today phased out, right? There are folks in communities in Illinois that spent a lot of money to get the Sears global headquarters in the 1990s, right? And if I had given this presentation to them and said, well, listen, 30 years from now, Sears isn't going to be a thing, I would have gotten whacked up rude, right? And told I have no idea what I'm talking about, but here we are. And avoiding outsourcing, foreign competition, that's something for our region that's been a big deal, right? And it's been a huge seismic global shift. Automation, another huge seismic global shift that has impacted employment and wages. And then you also are betting that your private partner is going to manage their own house, right? Corporations have goals, they have CEOs, they have leadership, and we see sometimes those leaders change out. They retire, they get fired, the board changes direction, and that can come with a strategy change that ripples down through their supply chain, through their factories, into the rest of the workforce of the corporation, right? And so, economic development for the better part of the last 40 years has really been around this idea of if you build it, they will come. And I think there are a lot of communities around our region that they have not come. That it's, you've got factories that have come and gone, but you don't necessarily have this robust population growth, this boom that was promised that will last, forever. And so it's not quite as elegant as if you build it, they will come. I'm not going to pretend to write a new proverb up here, but they will build it in and come to communities that support high quality of life and good business environments. And that is the precursor to economic development. You can't force the square peg in the round hole and try to build it all up and say, well, we hope that the high skilled workers will come. We hope that the folks will just stick around. We hope that we'll get all this outside investment. This white knight will come in and help us save the community's economy. It has to go in reverse. And that's a much slower and much more difficult process, right? And so it's really hard to come up with this kind of bottom-up, inside-out approach to economic development. But I'll give you a recent example. Where I'm from in Ohio, the last couple of years have been really dominated by headlines about Intel. And Ohio, if you've listened to basically anybody from Ohio talk, or the President of the United States, you've heard about this $20 billion investment that Intel is making outside of Columbus, Ohio. We had Joe Biden and Mike DeWine, our governor, broke ground on this big investment. I always tell folks that when those two folks come to town and agree on the same thing, you probably should ask some questions about what's going on, right? And when you look at the total of the state budget, the federal CHIPS Act that the Biden administration passed, and the local property tax incentives in Lincoln County and New Albany, where this thing is based, over about 30 years, it's $7 billion in tax incentives for this $20 billion facility. So that's a pretty good deal for Intel. We get it. We're not the West Coast. We're not, we've got to put some incentives on the table to get a large company to come and do this advanced manufacturing thing, whatever that means. And this was going to come with 3,000 high-tech jobs, whatever that means. 7,000 construction jobs. Those will probably show up, and they kind of are. I'll talk about that in a second. And tens of thousands of indirect jobs. So really great promises. This is really super facility. Intel, anybody who's had a computer since the 90s has probably seen that little Intel logo on a little metal thing on their computer. So what the heck could go wrong? Well, actually quite a bit. Intel, it turns out, is about 3 to 5 years behind in technology on TSMC and Samsung, their global competitors, who actually produce the chips for the data center. When the president came to town, President Biden said, this is going to fix inflation. We're going to reverse the trends with the auto industry because we're going to make the chips that can get to cars and moving off the supply chain. Well, that's not the type of chip we're making here in Columbus, and it's actually too outdated. No US auto manufacturers use this type of Intel chip. You've seen probably in the last couple months that Intel has been the subject of a takeover from Qualcomm being completely bought out, and that there's some serious questions about whether this chip fab in Columbus will actually happen. They asked TSMC last week if they would consider buying up Intel's fabrication facilities. TSMC uses a different process and says, well, no, not really, because that's not the type of technology we use to manufacture our 3-nanometer chips, and it would take a lot of money for us to convert it. So you've got a picture up there of a spilled basket of eggs, a spilled basket of eggs. And this is what you run the risk of in traditional economic development practices when you put all the eggs in one basket. You can actually end up a little worse off than you started. I know I'm in Steelers country, so I'll use the Browns analogy. There's always this great picture that circulates with all the Browns quarterbacks' names over the years on the back of a jersey. And this is the same philosophy that everywhere in the world that has told us for the last 20 years they're going to be the next Silicon Valley, right? That's what, there were shirts in Ohio you could buy that said Silicon Heartland, heart of it all these Ohio things all over Intel. And, we're unfortunately another name on the long list of quarterbacks who aren't going to work out, of Silicon Valleys who aren't going to work out. It turns out there's only one Silicon Valley. And it is Silicon Valley, and it's a Silicon Valley because of the pre-existing community foundation that existed at the right time, in the right place, when this emerging technology in the 1970s and 1980s was coming about. You had investments from Stanford, you had latent capital, you had the actual small startup culture in place. You had information sharing and skill sharing between workers at different companies that allowed all of these large tech companies to grow, and that's really hard to replicate. If anybody in Ohio had done a Google search from the Federal Reserve data, you could also have found that semiconductor manufacturing probably wasn't going to be a savior for the economy, right, in Ohio, because it's been trending down since the 1980s and early 2000s. Nationally, semiconductor employment is nowhere near where it was, and building a $20 billion chip fab sounds really great, but at the cost of $7 billion to taxpayers, and given national trends, it might not be the best bet. We hear a lot about site selection and economic development strategy, so I'll throw some data behind it. Ohio was one of the states that Governor Shapiro here in Pennsylvania cited in January in his new kind of 10-year economic development vision for the state here. And on page 7 of that report, it says explicitly, we would like to be more like Ohio. Pennsylvania is falling behind Ohio and New York in giving out economic development incentives, and we really need to catch up. The governor identifies semiconductors as an area that he thinks needs to be something that the state invests in heavily. Well, the data here is pulled from Site Selection Magazine, which is an economic development trade publication, and they every March do what's called the Governor's Cup, where they evaluate how many large firm openings a state has. And there's a great caricature cartoon of whatever state has the most. The governor's on the front holding up a trophy. It's really all great. But when you actually plot that against and control for things like the pandemic, and you plot that against job growth, there's not really a trend. This line is fairly flat. And that large red dot there is Ohio, who, if you look at the side, I like to say, I usually, when I present this in Ohio, I say we're usually top 4 in college football, and we're also top 4 in giving away money to large corporations to come to the state. But since 2006, Ohio has routinely been a top 4 among the 50 states in site selection. We've recruited a ton of companies. We've brought a ton of folks to the state. We've helped them get state, with state incentives. We've helped them find places to build factories and build businesses. The net result is that if you look since 2019 in control for COVID, we've lost 1.8% of our non-farm employment. So it's not a great return on investment, right? Really, the only argument you can make here is, well, it could have been worse. And I would argue for $7 billion, we should probably be doing a little bit better than it could have been worse, right? And so when I talk to folks and I say, well, if I gave you $7 billion over the next 30 years to make your state a more attractive place for folks to live and work in the future, how would you spend it? And nobody ever tells me we will give it all to one company and hope it works out. That's just not a very smart, diversified economic development strategy. And so really this is the core of what I want to share today. And I really like the exercise where all the tables got to share out, because I think you all are on it and that you all are thinking about this already the right way. If I think about the economy as this red circle, and I think about the community as this green circle, I've got some characteristics of my community. I've got healthcare, I've got education and skills, I've got food security, civics and culture, dignity of work. We value the work folks do, we pay fair wages, we take care of folks who are in the workforce. We've got clean air and water, we've got an entrepreneurial environment that fosters folks to step up and start businesses. We've got affordable housing and good infrastructure. Traditional economic development has kind of looked like this. We've said, well, let's bundle together some tax incentives. Let's divert some money from this green circle into the red circle, and we'll try to grow it. And we're going to give it to a company to come from somewhere else as a white knight, and we'll give them this money to relocate here to create some jobs. If they build it, people will come. And what you run the risk of in a lot of cases is this happens, right? It might be good for a while. You get some construction job booms. That's great. You get some good times while the technology is relevant, while the energy markets are doing good, whatever the case may be. But when the bust comes, that red circle deflates because the green circle can't support it. And what ends up happening is if that factory polluted air and water, if that factory diverted tax dollars from local schools that now didn't have as much investment in them, if those tax dollars went to a company that doesn't, they're not unionized or they don't pay fair wages, you actually end up maybe worse off when that company leaves, whether they're going overseas or going to another state to chase a more lucrative tax incentive package, right? We see this in Ohio a lot. When a tax incentive expires, the company comes back and says, well, geez, we'd love to stay, but I'll tell you what, Georgia's offering us a heck of a lot of money to move our headquarters down there. And it's this shell game, right? We shuffle things around. And so you end up actually doing damage to this core at the end of the day. And you're trading it for maybe a short-term boom or short-term gain. We call it ribbon cutting ceremony. Politicians love to cut ribbons, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you cut ribbons at the expense of damage to the long-term core, it can create some problems. And so really as we think about what after 40 years, right, economic development might mean to look like in the future, we hear a lot about transition economies. Why is a transition necessary? That's because the last version wasn't sustainable. Right? We have to transition away from something that no longer was sustainable to something we hope is more sustainable. And so we've got to think about these things as we go. And this is really where we need to get in our direction, which is you can grow the economy when you grow the community, when you invest in these elements that make the community more prosperous, that increase quality of life, that make people want to move here, right? It goes back to that saying, I know it's not as attractive as if you build it, they will come. But if the hard work gets done to actually solidify that core and both circles expand outward together, that's how you get to a place where that collapse, that bust doesn't necessarily happen, right? And that's how we diversify, that's how we avoid the eggs in one basket. So I think that's something that you all, I hope I'm inspired listening to all the different ideas we'll continue to think about and kind of as new opportunities present themselves, especially with a lot of the federal funding that's becoming available, we'll think about how does it fit into this mindset, this idea that let's invest in the prosperity of the community and grow from the inside out instead of trying to lure somebody in to get that outer circle a little bit bigger. So thank you very much and look forward to any questions or comments.
Good to you. Maybe I have to follow that, but that's really good. I learned a lot from you. Thanks. So my name's Noah Shodas. I'm the Director of Sustainability with the Lindy Group. And we're a family company and a family of companies. And so PJ, Dick, and Trumbull and the Lindy Group, we've been around for about 40 years, headquartered in Pittsburgh, done a lot of work, and we've been consistently among the top 100 contractors in the United States. We primarily work in the states Pennsylvania touches. We're not really trying to grow bigger than that. Since we're privately held and owned, we kind of want to keep the family involved. So PJ Dick, that's our vertical arm. I worked for them for 15 years, before coming to Lindy Group. And so they build big buildings. And so if it's healthcare or higher ed, I think we actually built the rec center on IUP's campus, locally. The Penn's Arena, the tower at PNC Plaza, Tapper at Carnegie Mellon, Bakery Square, UPMC. Yeah, I just gotta fly through some of this stuff. Trumbull is our heavy civil, and so, you know, big engineering feats, locks, dams. We put the tunnel under the river in Pittsburgh for the T. So, yeah, you see them on the turnpike widening it. Yeah, those are all our trucks. And then we get to the Lindy Group. And so the Lindy Group's a holding company. We have asphalt supply, concrete supply, asphalt bridge and utility construction. We are kind of a smaller contractor, but within the asphalt community, we are leading the country. We've won 5 Sheldon G. Hayes Awards, which the National Asphalt Paving Association awards. The closest to 5 is 2. And so, you know, Pennsylvania has some of the highest quality roads and asphalt being produced right here. So we have 11 plants, one of which is in Homer City. We have got that one through an acquisition. We have 4 concrete plants and 2 portables that we ship to different large projects. And then we do big jobs, you know, so like I said, we're widening the turnpike, but we also work with, you know, counties and municipalities to help them, you know, meet their road maintenance schedules. So as mentioned, you know, I've been the green geek forever. And so when I was with PJ Dick, one of my projects she mentioned was the Brick Environmental Center, Living Building Challenge certified. That's, for those of you unfamiliar, like that's the most rigorous environmental standard a building can achieve. It was started in 2006. We're 18 years later. There's less than 40 in the world. Pittsburgh has 2 of them, maybe 3. 3? Yeah. And so it's remarkable that, you know, we are building buildings that are, you know, leading the world in how to do things. So, Nick, I really liked your presentation because I struggle with the same question, you know, like sustainability, you know, what is it? Why do we care about this? And so, you know, my company's have had a cost model that's been very successful for 40 years. Our business plan, you know, needs to be sustainable. So that means that there's pressures environmentally and socially that need to be adopted into that business plan. And so, you know, as we look to, you know, environmental compliance, that's been kind of our approach to the environment in the past. Well, compliance isn't adequate. We now need to change. We need to incorporate ways to produce better materials. And, you know, socially, you know, like we have to care about equity, inclusion, diversity, but all of that, if we want to attract and retain, you know, tomorrow's workforce. And so our business model of yesterday, it doesn't work. You know, we need to adapt and we need to change that to become sustainable. So when we talk about sustainability, it's not solar panels or green stuff, you know, like you got to be thinking about the whole package. Okay, so I'm going to start talking a little bit about decarbonization and why we care about carbon. And so, you know, I try to understand things. You got to speak to me like I'm a 13-year-old. But, you know, CO2 is the poster child of the greenhouse gases that, you know, we're kind of tracking. And so in my world in construction, you know, we emit CO2 when we extract the raw materials, when we truck those materials to the factories to make the products. But at the factories, we invest more energy and produce more emissions to make the products, then we truck those to my job site. And then at the job site, we produce more emissions with the equipment we use to install these materials. And so then after that, you know, we build the building and we move in And then we want to turn the lights on, and, you know, we want air conditioning, and we need to plug in our computers. Like, that's operational carbon that the building then continues to produce emissions. But, and so, you know, we're starting to understand that everything has an impact, and the choices that we make dictate whether or not we emit, you know, CO2 or other greenhouse gases. And so we're starting to track, you know, kind of our emissions along scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And scope 1, you know, are direct emissions. And so those are, you know, at my asphalt plants, you have to heat up the aggregates. And so we're burning, you know, natural gas in most cases. That's a scope 1 emission. Scope 2 is more like, you know, the EV that I drive. Like, it doesn't have any emissions coming out of the tailpipe, but when I'm plugged in, that electricity is coming from a coal-fired or gas-fired power plant. And so those emissions are somewhere else. But, you know, I'm driving an EV and it's not coming out of my tailpipe, but I'm still producing emissions by driving it. And then scope 3 are upstream and downstream emissions. So when I buy products, they come with emissions, or if I build a road, there's going to be cars driving on that road, and they're going to be producing emissions. And so now I'm trying to track all of my impact, you know, through our operations. And it's not just me. The reason why I'm motivated to do it is because a lot of my clients are starting to ask me to do this. And it's not just Amazon and Google. A lot of the oil and gas clients that we have are currently asking us to report our greenhouse gases. It's crazy, but they're the first ones that have taken us, and, you know, when we bid a job, they rate us and they ask us questions about safety and about quality. And now they're just starting to ask us about our greenhouse gas accounting, about our goals and how we're doing in measurement. So, you know, as a response to all of these things, you know, some of the trade organizations that I'm involved with, you know, we're starting to put together goals for the industry as a whole. And so the National Asphalt Paving Association, we helped to develop this program. It's called the Road Forward. But basically, it's a goal to achieve net zero carbon emission asphalt in production and construction by 2050. So there's goals that we have laid out. We're meeting, you know, frequently, and, you know, Lindy Paving is at the forefront of a lot of the research and trying to figure out ways to get there. One of the ways that we're tracking things that we're excited to be working with PennDOT to mandate EPDs, environmental product declarations for asphalt mixtures as of January 1st, 2025. That's coming out. And so Indiana County and municipalities will have to start understanding this language. But essentially, if you look at the cradle to gate kind of circle in the upper right-hand corner, you know, we are quantifying the amount of emissions in the extraction of the ingredients, the transportation of those ingredients to my plant, and then the amount of emissions that I use to generate the mix that I sell. So for every ton of asphalt that I produce, I can tell you its global warming potential. Why? Well, what if you want to have a road that has less emissions? You know, the first step is to figure out where everyone's at, and so we're asking everyone to do the accounting. But the next step is going to be, we need to buy lower carbon materials. And so the best way to think about this EPD is a nutrition label. And so it is a verified, third-party verified, you know, review of all of the inputs in the life cycle of producing asphalt. We're also producing for concrete, but I'm just talking about asphalt right now. So, and so, like, this is really exciting for Pennsylvania. You know, we're one of the first states to be mandating this requirement. You know, we're going to spend some time benchmarking it, but, you know, at the end of the day, this is going to spur innovation at the producer level. And so, you know, our hope is that, you know, we can teach counties and municipalities and everyone to start asking for lower carbon material because we can produce it. We can give the same quality roads that have won so many awards with less emissions if we're allowed to do that. And most of the municipalities and counties don't usually do that. They default to PennDOT specifications, which, you know, doesn't let me really drive that needle down. So that's what I brought today. I'll stick around for questions.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Amelia Eggan. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Pennsylvania Solar Center. Like you heard, I did go to IUP, and I also went to Chatham Public School System Philly. I'm here on behalf of the Pennsylvania Solar Center. So I'm today going to talk a little bit about the Solar Center and mostly our Get Solar program, but also kind of introduce you to some of the avenues for paying for solar, some of the challenges, and then some of the ideas I have for solar in Indiana County to address some of the issues that we've heard this morning. So our mission and vision is really that, you know, we're trying to help Pennsylvania become a leader in renewable energy through rapid and broad expansion of in-state solar generation. We really advocate for distributed solar. So that would be, you know, solar on an industrial park over there, on your house over there, maybe a ground mount at school. We find that there are a lot of benefits to grid resiliency when you do it in a distributed manner. And so we just try to, our goal is really to be a trusted resource so that, you know, all Pennsylvanians can come to us and know that you're going to get an unbiased resource and education about solar and the way to move forward. So we are foundation funded, as well as a couple of industry folks. So we kind of have a three-tier approach. So walking the walk, our transform, that's what we call our Get Solar program, our technical assistance, which I'll speak about more in depth. Outreach, public awareness, and resources. So we have a couple of webinar series. We call them Want to Learn webinar series, where once a month on Fridays, if you would like to become a solar nerd like me, you can join us and learn about new topics, everything from microgrids to, we're actually doing one today on the Solar for Schools bill. We'll probably be doing some in the future for, you know, agri-solar, new funding opportunities that come down the line, pretty much anything and everything that seems to be front of mind. We like to try to cover and bring some experts in the field on there. And then policy and education and advocacy. So our founder and director, Sharon Pillar, is one of the foremost advocates for solar policy in Pennsylvania. So she works tirelessly with folks from Harrisburg. She helps push things like in-state generation. So not only do we need to mandate, you know, 35 by 35 is what they're saying right now in the press mandates, but also a certain amount of that needs to be generated in state. So she was pretty pivotal in helping that pass back in, I believe, 2015, but continuing that in the future. But today we're mostly going to talk about our Get Solar program, because this is kind of how you actually do the thing, right? So Get Solar stands for Galvanizing Our Energy Transition. Our team, we work exclusively in the commercial sector. We are a mighty team of now 6. And we have about, I'm sorry, some of these numbers are wrong because they're literally changing every day, but we have about 300 projects in our queue. And a few of those are here in Indiana. As a graduate, I volunteered myself to work with folks throughout the county here. But we work mostly these days with school districts because of the Solar for Schools bill coming out. But we will also work with a number of municipalities, businesses and nonprofits, faith organizations, and a few farms, and we have some resources for landowners, especially as we're seeing more and more some people coming and saying, hey, I'm getting all of, you know, I have 150 acres and I'm getting like solicited by 5 different developers. What do I do? And what are the legalities here? So we have a couple of resources on our website for that. So again, these are kind of the active programs that we serve. You'll notice that Indiana County is on here, and I keep pushing. Some of the projects that we've completed previously are CCAC North Campus. This is what we call a power purchase agreement, which I'll get to later as some of the funding mechanisms. But this was a pretty large site in the Pittsburgh region. Oh, and by the way, we are located in Pittsburgh, but we do operate all throughout the state. This one, Utz Properties, they are the ones that make those pretzels. They did this in a cash purchase, but it's just a small family business. So this might be something closer to what you would see if, you know, somebody in Indiana or on Philadelphia Street would go solar. It would be a system more like this. And then Burner International in Newcastle, this was more so a manufacturer, a large manufacturer. They actually got the USDA REAP grant and were able to take advantage of some of the IRA benefits. So they were actually able to overproduce their system a little bit for now with the idea that they're going to be ramping up their productions. And as they electrify and ramp up their productions, they will have enough solar to continue their expansion. And now is a really great time to go solar. So not only, I'm not sure how all of you are familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act, but that was really pivotal when it passed in 2022 because now, for a couple decades now, for-profits have been able to utilize these tax credits whenever they go solar as a financial incentive, but that is now awarded to tax-exempt entities as well. So there's a base 30%. So if you were to go solar, say your project was $100,000, you get $30,000 back. In Indiana, you all are considered, like the entire county is considered an energy community, so that's an additional 10%. So if you go through with the solar project, if you own the system, you automatically get 40% of the cost of that back, and that will come in the next tax year. So that direct pay option or elective pay, it's the same thing used interchangeably. That has really changed the game for schools and municipalities. Other than that, we're not as fortunate as some of our surrounding states because they also have state benefits, tax benefits. So like in New York, you can get solar for like much cheaper than you can in Pennsylvania. But we do have an Act 129 solar rebate program that is directly from the utility. And then there are a couple other financial mechanisms that I'll get to. But the important thing to know if you're thinking about it as a school or municipality or even as a business is these all kind of come back as retroactive grants. So the government's not going to pay you if you don't do this thing, right? So you have to pay for the system and install it, and then they'll give you that almost as a rebate or retroactive grant. But I do want to kind of come back to this top point of utility electricity costs has driven dramatically. This is actually going to increase. So what we've seen recently is that with the most recent auction on the PJM, which is like they're the grid operators for our entire region, expands Pennsylvania, I think, into Maryland, some of Virginia. It's huge, and they're kind of who our utilities buy electricity from them. The capacity in that market is at this really weird flux right now, where some of the coal plants, as we know here, are going offline and they're not necessarily developing new ones, but they also haven't, they're really slow on their interconnection for renewable resources. So, and with all of the elevated consumption needs of AI and database centers, there's this really kind of weird flux of a super amount of demand that we've never seen before, and like not quite enough capacity. So at the auction itself, like the prices of that rose dramatically, and that's going to be passed on to all of us as the consumer. So I haven't necessarily heard for First Energy, which would be this territory, but I know Duquesne Light, I've heard about 10% rise in electricity prices starting potentially the end of this year. If not, you'll see that by next summer. So all of that being said, it's a great time to go solar. So not only is it that electricity costs are rising, it also helps you create more predictable energy costs. It can also provide revenues through something called solar renewable energy credits. So those are basically a free market system where you are getting paid for your renewable energy production. So it's a really great kind of like icing on the cake that can often kind of enforce your return on investment up to 2 years sometimes. And then once your solar is paid for, that's money that you're generating year over year. Now again, that is a free market system. It almost acts like stock. So it fluctuates. So we don't know what the cost of that is going to be in the future, but it is driven by policy. So if we are to pass something at the state level, like 35 by 35, we can see that the value of those SRECs will continue. And then, you know, if you're paying less for your electricity, which is something that you're on the hook for, no matter what, right? Like no matter what, you have to pay to keep the lights on. At least now you can kind of stabilize those costs into a more predictable rate, and then you can use that money in other ways. For schools a lot, you know, we're able to kind of generate these 25-year cash flow analyses, and every year it's equivalent to a teacher's salary in some cases, you know, depending on the size of the system and what they can offset. So again, electricity rates are increasing. And I already Inflation Reduction Act. So for-profit businesses, another benefit of the Inflation Reduction Act is this, the modified accelerated cost recovery system. So it's accelerated depreciation essentially, and it kind of acts like almost, we calculated around 18% bump in the first year. So again, we see that for-profit businesses can take advantage of this, and that helps with their return on investment pretty significantly too. So there's a couple of different ways of paying for solar. You can either, you know, if you've got the money, great. I'm sure every developer would love to work with you. But that being said, we know that, you know, a lot of small municipalities, especially urban municipalities, sometimes it's a really small team. They're doing a lot of things. And you know, money can be tight. So there are a couple of financing opportunities in this region, specifically Bridgeway Capital comes to mind. They are looking to do some loans for, you know, as low as 3%. We're also working with folks like the Sustainable Energy Fund, who are doing about 5%, maybe 6%. So there's a number of kind of green financing opportunities, and those are continuing to develop. We're seeing that more and more people are interested in reaching out to our organization because now that, you know, the organizations themselves understand the IRA and the way that these direct pay benefits work and such, and that electricity is rising, they're willing to be, you know, more favorable for these green energy programs. So financing is a really great opportunity for bridge loans. And then another one that's interesting is called power purchase agreements. Usually this is only good for like really large systems, but about 90% of schools throughout the country finance it in this way. So it's essentially that the developer owns and maintains the system, and you kind of give them a lease for your roof or your ground, or they're going to be acting like your utility company. So just like you would pay, First Energy, okay, yeah, just like you would pay First Energy, you will be paying your solar developer. And so if that's, you know, covering 100% of your system, then your solar developer now just acts as your utility provider, and you get, you negotiate a base rate and a base escalation, you know, 7 cents, 1% escalation for the next 25 years. That means that school district knows exactly what they're going to be paying over the next 25 years. And so they can, you know, allocate those to other resources. I know that maybe doesn't sound like a lot, 7 cents is still, you know, kind of high, but when you look at that year over year, what we're seeing is, you know, saving sometimes in the millions for school districts, municipalities. It can be, and again, it's kind of a headache-free way of going solar because you don't actually have to worry about any of the maintenance and you don't own any of the equipment. So some of those really finicky procurement requirements can also be more of a RFP instead of a competitive bid. So it's a much easier way for school districts to be able to go solar. And then I did want to mention the REAP program. because this is, I think, really interesting for agri-solar and for Indiana, generally speaking. So we actually were working with a local medical team who is building a building here. I forget what road it's on, but it's pretty close to here, actually. And they were just awarded a REAP grant for a rooftop system. So this REAP program is 50% of the project cost. It's for agricultural entities and rural small businesses. And small business is defined by the actual industry that you're in. So, we've had a couple of really huge manufacturers that we thought were massive that are actually small businesses. But pizza shops, flower shops, again, this medical team, if anyone in this area is interested in solar, I would say that this is a good program. Now, I will say that they are waiting for the next round on the passing of the next farm bill. So keep your eyes out for that one if you know anybody who's a rural business and is interested in this program. So it's 50% of the project cost, and then all of those IRA benefits stack on top of it. So you're looking at 90% of the project cost. And I think that that could be a really great one to help with agri-solar. So, this morning, and especially at the table I was sitting at and listening to Gina, it seemed, agriculture is a main economic driver here. But as we've heard, maybe some of the, the farmers, there aren't as many farmers right now to meet the demand in the future, but we're hoping to develop some of these programs so that there are more farmers in the future. Just anecdotally, what we've seen from a lot of people who reach out to us is that, the kids or grandkids have moved on to other industries. They have a family farm. They don't want to sell it, but they don't know what to do with it. Solar could be a really great way of preserving these family farms until there's, maybe 20, 30 years down the line, see if the next generation would like to use it. Solar isn't, it's a 25 to maybe 40-year kind of investment, and then you can move it. And that land is still there, and it's been, there preserved for 40 years, and you can make basically another game with that land. So I think that that's a different kind of way I like to think about agri-solar, is that, it also can still be an economic way to make money off of the land that maybe some families would like to keep in the family, but aren't sure how to use that right now. We've heard basically that anecdote from a number of families who have reached out to us throughout the state. And it also helps support, a lot of energy production going into the grid in some of these more urban areas, which again can help with, especially somewhere like here, where some of the fossil fuel industries are coming offline. Maybe you can use this land to both help preserve the land and implement more renewables on the grid. So I think I talked about all of these things. So just quickly, our Get Solar process is that you kind of enter into it with us, and we do a basic feasibility study. For municipalities and schools, we'll really look at everything. I want to be clear that we do not advocate for deforestation for solar projects. We think that's kind of counterintuitive. But there's a lot of schools who are just mowing the fields. That's a great place for a huge ground mount system that can offset some of the energy. But we do look at everything within a 2-mile radius. Pennsylvania has something called net metering or net metering aggregation. So you actually have a 2-mile radius from parcel boundary to parcel boundary as the crow flies. So you can develop a solar array over here and then offset a meter 1.5 miles away. So in rural areas, this creates a really great opportunity to maybe set up some large ground mount systems that can offset a significant percent of consumption. So our team would help, look all throughout this, at all of the opportunities, both rooftop, ground mount. Carports are still really expensive, but that can be a really great opportunity too. And then we kind of develop these solar models. So we use something called Helioscope, which is an industry standard software. And then we kind of get this information, your utility bills. We see what the potential solar could offset, and then we kind of plug that into some models that we've created to make a 25 to 30-year cash flow analysis. So you can see year over year, if you want to use a direct payment option, what the IRA benefits would look like for you, what the operation and maintenance expenses would be like, or if you'd like to do a loan or a power purchase agreement, we can model all of those different scenarios. And then we also help work through the procurement process. So again, we are a pretty small team. This is a developing industry. So, we've got some legal counsel to work through competitive bids, the visa process, some of the more strict requirements for state procurement. But if you're able to do a request for proposal, so that would be for a PPA or for a nonprofit or for-profit business, we actually have an RFP that we would release on your behalf. We have a list of over 70 qualified developers that we vetted for engineering capabilities and financial viability. Because what we don't want is that, 15 years down the line, your solar developer is out of business and there's no one to maintain your system. That has been a black eye in the solar industry. And so, one of the benefits of working and having, a trusted resource is that we can help vet those candidates, because some of the smaller developers can be a little bit predatory, or there's some that are coming in from out of state that maybe don't know the state landscape quite as well. So we're trying to, protect against that. So these are the next steps for if you would like to enter our program. We are, taking anybody in Indiana who's interested, specifically schools right now. I know that we are working with, we've been doing some feasibility studies for Indiana and Homer Center, but other schools throughout the county we would be happy to speak with, as well as, just regionally, generally speaking. And then I did also want to offer, so I run a program called Solar Core Mapping, and it's essentially where we take volunteers and we use a free online software. We just kind of look at an area or a region and we just start mapping it. So we kind of get the really high level potential for distributed solar in a given area. And then we kind of map all of the IRA benefits that an area is eligible on top of that. And it's very high level, but essentially we can, like, I have an example from New Kensington. We mapped 40 sites and they were all in some way municipalities, school districts, fire halls, water authorities, things like that. So tax exempt entities. We mapped about 40 sites and we found about $20 million in savings over 25 years. So if you're thinking about, the long-term economic viability of solar, or if you would just like to get kind of a high level understanding of what that could look like here, that's something that we've actually already started it for Indiana, and so that's something we could prioritize in some of our upcoming sessions to help get, again, a high level understanding of that. But I think that's all I have for today, so thank you.
Amazed as I am about all these possibilities. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions. There's a lot to in here. Yeah, over there.
Yeah,
Can you speak up really loud?
right, for Amelia, so it seems like you're able to almost triple dip on the cost for this. You get reimbursement, you get paid for the electricity, and then you can depreciate the cost of it.
So you're able to get, for a for-profit business, you would still get, in Indiana, you would get 40% tax credits plus accelerated depreciation, and that's a 5-year acceleration. So rather than depreciating it over 25 years, you can depreciate it in 5 years. And then you would get the Act 129 utility rebate. And then, year over year, you would make money on those solar renewable energy credits, which again, that's a fluctuating value. But a lot of, this this is applicable to residential as well. You essentially get paid for the production you make on your solar system every year.
And if Pennsylvania goes into the spreadsheet thing, potentially you get carbon credits.
I'm not as familiar with Reggie, to be honest. I know mainly, I'm not a policy expert, but I do know that, you know, if we set higher policy standards, specifically through press, I think is the one that's on the table right now, then that does drive the solar renewable energy credit market, because essentially, you know, utilities and government agencies and such have to say that, you know, they're offsetting or they're buying a certain amount of offsets, and you as the renewable energy producer sell them. Kind of.
What kind of battery systems are you using? Facilities you're working with?
So batteries, whole nother ballgame. So we're usually doing mostly just grid tied systems. We do some battery modeling for like resiliency sites, we like to call them. So for example, you know, on a fire hall or a school that's a designated, you know, cooling zone or a designated community center in case of emergency. We have been starting to do modeling on what the battery backups would need, like what the critical loads are, how many days you would need to run it to determine the size of the battery. I will say though, batteries are still extremely expensive. They're usually grant funded to get a battery because the economics just aren't quite there just yet, unfortunately. So we put in a grant with the municipality a couple of weeks ago, and the battery was like, it was like $1 million project for the battery, plus getting the site ready, put the battery in there, getting all of the electrical hookups that were necessary. And this was just to power like I think 1 or 2 garbage truck EVs that go out once a week. So yeah, no, it's still really expensive, unfortunately. At the commercial scale anyway.
Questions?
Actually, I would have questions for 2 of your panelists. So, I feel you missed the question after the session here. But to Amelia, maybe this is not a local issue yet, but Pittsburgh newscasts have been focusing on a solar farm problem in Fayette County, a zoning problem down there. Have you seen anything like that elsewhere or close to home? If you know what I'm talking about.
I think I know which project you're talking about, but I'm not overly familiar with it.
All right.
I do know that there's a lot of interest in kind of developing solar farms on things like brownfield sites. That also often has a lot of issues with zoning and then site reclamation. And so it's a really great way to reuse that space, but it comes with significant challenges.
What about the number of panels that are needed for a solar farm? Is that how outrageous that is?
It depends on the size of the farm and the size of the panels. I mean, every project is extremely specific. And if you're looking at, you know, I have no idea.
No,
probably a lot, but it's
just seeing if a story in another part of the state has local impact, and then you were saying at the moment, the answer is probably no.
I saw it, hand up, yeah, Laura.
I have no idea what he just asked, so I may be asking the same question. I hope everyone can hear me. On the planning commission, we're looking at developing an ordinance regarding large-scale solar farms. And what is the policy that your organization is taking regarding that?
Yeah, so again, we do not advocate for deforestation. I am not on the policy team, so I would be happy to send to the landowner's guidebook that we have created, or that, our executive director and our director of government affairs, they created that, and it was in partnership with, Fair Shape, who does a lot of, legal work in the kind of environmental space. As far as the specific policies, they would be laid out kind of in that guidebook, or I could connect you with our executive director, Sharon. She's a much better resource than I, because she is policy lead and I am not.
Or if you would reach out to the planning office or Indiana County Office of Planning and Development, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the third on that.
A question for, Nick. It's probably easier to pull out the big failures of some of this economic investment. Do you have any examples of communities who've done, a good job of kind of diversifying that? Obviously, it's not a perfect model you can pick up and just drop it in the community, but if I could provide some examples that we could use here.
Yeah, so the answer is there's a lot more small scale successes around the country than there are big scale, right? Because by nature, when you're recruiting in Amazon, second headquarters, or I mentioned Sears or Intel, that's a huge flashing multi-billion-dollar project. But I think the rule of thumb, if you're thinking about, well, what should we consider in our strategy here, is you have to kind of evaluate how much local labor is going to be used, right? One of the things we hear all around when we look at these mega projects is you don't have enough local construction labor to do a mega project, so you're bringing in trucks from out of state or construction workers from other parts of the country or other nearby states. So the more local labor that's going to be able to be utilized in a project is going to drive what we call economic multipliers up. And so you actually end up with a scenario where when you're doing things like, housing construction, when you're doing things like weatherization, energy efficiency, when you're starting small businesses that are, rooted in the downtown of the community, those places are going to employ local workers, whether it's local construction workers or local retail workers. Those incomes are going to circulate locally, right? Those folks buy houses here, they pay taxes here, they grocery shop here, they school, back to school shop here. If they have families, they send their kids to school here, right? So there's a kind of local geographic effect to it. So I would say that for modeling or thinking about what types of businesses or projects are maybe worth the investment or have a better shot at being worth the investment, it's businesses that are more committed to circulating those dollars locally through local. Construction work is great. I made the point that, Intel, if you go through Columbus, construction work there, last I checked, is up about 8% on the year, right? That's a huge spike. Statewide, Ohio, it's only about 4%. But the problem is that if you talk to folks who are trying to build homes, they're like, we don't have the workers to do that, right? We've got an affordable housing problem. We can't build single-family homes or apartment complexes because this entity that's gotten $7 billion in subsidy is vacuuming up construction work in the region. And actually more than that, you're bringing in out-of-state folks. Same kind of thing happened here in Western Pennsylvania, right? With a lot of the oil and gas boom is, when you're in that drilling phase and you're building roads out, when you're actually drilling wells, you've got folks who are maybe coming from out of state or other regions with that expertise who are doing the work. But if they're not buying property here, they're not paying the taxes here, they're not living here for more than 2 or 3 years or in construction season, those dollars kind of get siphoned back off, right? Another element I'll kind of point out to your question, it's a really long answer. But the other thing is that you have to kind of consider, are we getting the headquarters or are we getting the back end? Because if you're looking at higher paying jobs, right, in financial in a company, the C-suite level, right, the salaries they tend to be higher in these kind of white collar positions. If that headquarters is in a different state or a different county or a different city, then any of the productivity from whatever's being built here, a portion of it's going to necessarily get siphoned back to pay those higher salaries, right? So I think kind of a combination, the successful communities incentivize projects that use a high degree of local workforce or entrepreneur, invest in entrepreneurship. And they also tend to recruit headquarters as opposed to just kind of outposts or single standing factories, right? Manufacturing facilities. The final point I'll make is in Ohio. I hammer Ohio a lot, right? And the jobs Ohio folks don't like me very much because I always tell them that I don't think they're doing a very good job. But one thing I'll give them an immense amount of credit for is there are a lot of states that don't have their economic development organizations don't enforce any type of clawback mechanism. And actually, Jobs Ohio does a pretty decent job on really on small scale projects. If we do site prep for you, right? If we invest in state grants to actually, my hometown is a small town, small county in Northern Ohio. They had a Peloton facility. Everybody remembers during the pandemic, all the commercials for those Peloton bikes, and it seemed like everybody wanted to buy a Peloton bike, right? So Peloton's like, wow, business is great. We're going to build a new factory. So they actually site selected Wood County, Ohio, Bowling Green, Ohio, as a site for this, 500 job Peloton facility. And Jobs Ohio, the state economic development entity, gave them a grant to help them prep this manufacturing site for these bikes. Well, the pandemic ended. And maybe predictably, but we won't blame anybody. You never want to think things aren't going to go good. Demand for the Peloton bikes dropped. People were reselling them on the secondhand market. So they said, well, hey, we're not going to make this investment. We don't need to build out this manufacturing capacity. Well, the state's actually able to claw back some of that money from Peloton and retain ownership on the site to repurpose it for something else. So I know I hammered Ohio a lot, kind of tongue in cheek in my presentation, but I think that's another element is that if a community is going to chase a large project with tax incentives, making sure that there is a really strong clawback mechanism for, hey, if you don't produce the jobs you say you're going to produce, if you don't hit the timelines you say you're going to produce, if the impact isn't there, you have to pay back what we gave you to do the project, right? And I think that's a really kind of important point to remember too. Sorry, it's probably way more than you want.
No, it's good. Thank you.
So we are. All right, I saw this lady right here.
Yes. I saw on the label for your asphalt project that you had like 17 megajoules of renewable energy, but I didn't see a renewable content. How much renewable or recycled content is it just the aggregate, or can you throw other things like plastics into that asphalt mix?
That's the secret to, decarbonizing asphalt, is that we make roads out of roads. And so the binder that is in the road today that we're driving on is still good. We can, mill that up, take it back. We need to crush it. We need to add rejuvenator to it. But what that does is it means we don't have to extract virgin binder out of, the Gulf of Mexico, process that and then ship it here. And so we try to use as much recycled content as possible. We are limited by specifications currently. And so we can do more. We want to do more, but we're not allowed. And so this is where I'm saying that, municipalities and counties, if you want lower carbon material, we can do that. We can work together, we'll warrant the installation. We can help you tap in funding. There's low carbon transportation material grants that are available to help you expand your budget when you decide to use these types of materials. But, the recycled content nationally is around 22%. We can do up to 60%.
Thank you very much. I'm being aware of time and the fact that yeah, I don't want to stand between people and lunch. I know I will get mowed down. So let's give these folks a there's somebody else who is, and so ask you questions. Thank you. And,